Hello everyone. Today I will present the paper entitled Equal Compensations under Actuarially Fair Contributions in Endowment Contingency Funds, a joint work with my colleague Michel Denuit. This paper introduces endowment contingency funds as a fully funded risk-sharing mechanism. The idea is simple. Members contribute in advance into a common pool over a reference period, and then the total collected amount is redistributed in arrear to those who experienced a predefined adverse event, such as critical illness, death, or survival to a given horizon. The design objective is to provide equal compensation among claimants, or equal compensation per subscribed protection unit, while preserving actuarial fairness. Each participant should have zero expected gain or loss when joining the pool. We show that, under mild conditions and mutual independence, large pools recover insurance at fair price, contributions converge to occurrence probabilities, and claim payouts concentrate around the targeted benefit. Finally, we discuss applications to mutual aid funds and survivor or longevity funds, and we compare the logic of these funds with takaful insurance, highlighting differences in refunds and fairness implementation. Let me start with the motivation. Many communities are looking for cheap protection against low frequency but high impact events. For instance, a diagnosis of a severe disease, the death of a breadwinner, or simply living longer than expected and needing resources at older ages. Traditional insurance can be expensive because of loadings, administrative costs, and the natural conflict of interest. Premiums paid by policyholders do not mechanically return to claimants. Endowment contingency funds address this by being fully funded. All payments at time 1 come from contributions already collected at time 0, so there is no default or counterparty risk for claimants. The trade-off is that benefits become random. The total pool is fixed, but the number of claimants is random, so the amount received per claimant fluctuates. This creates a genuine actuarial question. How do we set contributions to keep fairness? And how large must the pool be so that payout volatility is acceptable in practice? We consider n individuals indexed by I equals 1 to n. Each individual faces a binary indicator of event occurrence over the reference period. It takes value 1 if the event occurs for that individual and 0 otherwise. The probability of occurrence for participant I is denoted Qi, and we allow full heterogeneity across participants. Each participant pays a contribution CI at time 0. For simplicity, we work with zero interest, so the accumulated value at time 1 is the same amount. Total collected contributions are denoted B, the sum over all individuals. The number of claimants is Mn, the sum of all indicators. The mechanism is fully determined by a sharing rule that distributes B among claimants at time 1, and then we compute contributions so that actuarial fairness holds for each participant. The first mechanism corresponds to a uniform protection level. Every claimant receives the same payout when the event occurs. Concretely, when at least one event occurs, the total budget B is split equally among the MN claimants, so each claimant receives B divided by MN. If nobody claims, meaning MN equals 0, then contributions are refunded. This refund event matters for small pools, but becomes negligible for large pools, because the probability that nobody claims quickly goes to 0 when EN increases, and occurrence probabilities are not too small. The sponsor also announces a target benefit beta. This beta is not a guaranteed benefit, but rather the desired level that claimants should obtain on average or in the large pool limit. Finally, we determine the contributions by imposing actuarial fairness. For each participant, the expected terminal payout must equal the initial contribution. This is the key principle that prevents systematic transfers and discourages adverse selection. This slide presents the main contribution formula, which is equation 1 in the slides. Rather than reading the expression, let me explain its meaning. Participant I's expected payout depends on two things. First, whether I experiences the event, and second, how many other members experience it, because the fund is shared equally among claimants. To capture the number of other claimants, we introduce M and I, the number of claimants excluding participant I. If participant I claims and there are k minus 1 other claimants, then total claimants are k and I receives b divided by k. The fairness contribution is therefore a weighted average of 1 over k, across all possible values of k, multiplied by the probability of each scenario. Under mutual independence, The expression simplifies because I's event indicator is independent of the number of other claimants. In that case, the contribution is essentially proportional to QI with a correction factor reflecting pool dilution. This correction disappears asymptotically as the pool becomes large. Now we need to select the total budget B in a way that matches the announced target beta. This is equation 2 on the slides. Intuitively, the claimant payout is B divided by the random number of claimants, so the expected payout to a claimant depends on the expected value of 1 over Mn, given that Mn is at least 1. This conditional expectation is what we call pool dilution. If events are frequent, Mn is typically large, so each claimant receives a smaller share for a fixed budget. If events are rare, EMN tends to be small, and each claimant receives a larger share. By setting B so that B times that dilution factor equals beta, we ensure that the fund is calibrated to deliver the intended level of protection. Once B is chosen, the individual contributions follow from the fairness condition and depend on the full pool composition, especially in finite N. A central message of the paper is that, under mild regularity conditions and mutual independence, the endowment contingency fund converges to standard insurance at fair price when the pool becomes large. First, individual contributions converge to the pure premium. Participant I pays approximately QI times beta. This is the same price as a fair insurance contract paying beta in the event. Second, conditional on being a claimant, the terminal payout converges to beta. In other words, although the benefit is random in finite pools, diversification makes it almost deterministic in large pools. This provides an elegant interpretation. Compared to classical contribute in arrear, risk-sharing rules, endowment contingency funds shift randomness from contributions to benefits. But with enough diversification, this benefit randomness becomes negligible, so participants obtain the best of both worlds, certainty about what they pay, and near certainty about what they receive if they claim. Even if the large pool limit is reassuring, we still need quantitative guidance for finite N. This slide provides that through equation 3 and the associated rate result. The key object is the conditional variance of the payout received by a claimant. Because the payout is proportional to 1 over the number of claimants, volatility is driven by fluctuations in the number of other claimants. The paper proves that this conditional variance shrinks to 0 at rate 1 over n, meaning that multiplying the variance by n yields a finite constant limit depending on the average occurrence probability and the average of QI times 1 minus QRI. Practically, this result gives a rule of thumb for minimum pool size. If the sponsor wants the coefficient of variation of benefits to stay below a tolerance level, this asymptotic approximation provides an explicit way to determine how many participants are needed. Uniform benefits may be too restrictive because people have different needs. The paper therefore introduces a second mechanism where participants choose their protection level by subscribing an integer number of protection units, denoted WI. The total number of claiming units is ON, which counts units held by claimants. The total collected amount is shared equally across these claiming units, so benefits are equal per unit, not necessarily equal per person. A participant with more units receives proportionally more benefit in total, but each unit is treated identically in the allocation. An important point is that a natural alternative would be to make benefits proportional to contributions. The paper shows that this proportional sharing typically conflicts with actuarial fairness, unless all occurrence probabilities are the same. That is why the units design is the appropriate way to offer flexibility without breaking fairness. The sponsor then announces a target benefit per unit, beta W, and the large pool expected total payout for a claimant holding WI units becomes WI times beta W. Under independence across participants, the asymptotic behavior remains clean. The contribution per unit converges to QI times beta W, so again, we recover a pure premium interpretation per unit. However, allowing multiple units per participant creates within participant dependence. All units owned by the same participant either claim together or not, because they share the same event indicator. This is different from having WI independent copies, and it increases variability of the number of claiming units compared to an independent replication benchmark. The paper connects this to convex order arguments known from the analysis of duplicates in life insurance portfolios. Aggregating dependent copies makes the total more variable than a sum of independent indicators with the same marginals. The practical implication is straightforward. The unit mechanism preserves fairness, but if some individuals buy many units, the pool might need to be larger to maintain the same volatility target. The first application concerns mutual aid funds, inspired by online platforms that cover critical illness. Here, occurrence probabilities can be extremely small. In that regime, even very large participant counts may still imply that the expected number of claimants remains low. As a consequence, the payout per claimant can remain highly volatile. Sometimes there are no claimants, sometimes a handful, and each scenario changes the division of the fixed pool. To handle computations robustly, the paper advocates Poisson approximations for the distribution of the number of claimants. This is both mathematically natural and practically useful because binomial probabilities can become numerically unstable when QI values are very small and n is large. Finally, the paper compares the in advance funded mechanism to the more common contribute in arrear practice. The main message is that shifting randomness from contributions to benefits does not automatically eliminate instability when events are extremely rare. The underlying scarcity of claims remains the limiting factor. Let me now comment on the numerical illustration shown in this figure. We consider an heterogeneous pool where participants are partitioned into 3 risk groups with different occurrence probabilities. Specifically, Group 1 represents 50% of the participants and has occurrence probability 0.01. Group 2 represents 30% of the participants with occurrence probability 0.05, and Group 3 represents the remaining 20% with occurrence probability 0.10. Within each risk group, individuals may choose different protection levels. We assume that half of the participants select 1 protection unit, while the other half select 2 units. The fund is calibrated with a targeted benefit of 1 monetary unit per protection unit, so the key quantities reported in the figures are the actuarially fair contributions and the distribution of terminal payoffs under this mixed composition as the total number of participants increases. The horizontal axis is the number of participants, and the vertical axis is the contribution per unit. Curves correspond to different risk groups with different occurrence probabilities, and the figure distinguishes participants holding 1 unit from those holding 2 units. The key pattern is stabilization. As the number of participants grows, each contribution per unit converges toward the underlying occurrence probability consistent with the asymptotic result of the paper. In small pools, contributions deviate from their limit because pool dilution and the possibility of 0 claimants still matter. But once the pool is sufficiently large, differences across group membership become essentially a pure probability effect. High-risk individuals pay more per unit, low-risk individuals pay less per unit, and the number of subscribed units does not distort the unit price asymptotically. This provides clear operational guidance. In large communities, contributions can be priced almost as pure premiums per unit. This figure focuses on the distribution of payouts received by claimants. It illustrates a key caveat. When occurrence probabilities are very small, payout volatility can remain substantial even with large pools. You can see that the distributions are skewed and dispersed, reflecting the fact that claimants share a fixed total amount across a random and often small number of claiming units. When the number of claimants is occasionally 1 or 2, the benefit per claimant can be very high. When it is larger, the benefit drops. This highlights an important design issue for mutual aid style applications. Large N alone is not sufficient. The expected claim count also matters, which depends on both N and the average QI. Therefore, communicating volatility to participants and possibly adjusting the target benefit becomes critical for transparency and for the sustainability of participation. The second application considers the case where the predefined event is survival to the end of the reference period. The mechanism then becomes an endowment longevity fund, closely related to survivor funds and tontines. In this setting, those who die before time 1 do not claim, and their contributions are redistributed to survivors. This creates mortality credits, which are the additional returns generated by sharing the contributions of decedents among survivors. A key advantage of the endowment contingency fund design is that it accommodates heterogeneous survival probabilities while preserving actuarial fairness. This is important in realistic pools mixing ages and risk profiles, unlike many classical tontine models that assume homogeneity. The paper also discusses a public finance angle. A sponsor, such as a public body, could raise funds at zero interest, while participants benefit from mortality credit-driven returns, subject to careful control of benefit variability. The paper then discusses how this mechanism relates to takaful. A core difference is the interpretation of contributions. In many takaful structures, contributions are treated as donations, and refunds when no event occurs can be restricted, which complicates strict actuarial fairness. From an implementation viewpoint, the contributions depend on the full pool composition, so pricing requires access to participants' occurrence probabilities and unit choices. The paper suggests practical workarounds such as provisional pricing followed by reimbursement once the pool is finalized. Regulatory classification is another non-trivial aspect. Depending on the application, and especially for longevity-related products, some designs may be classified as insurance operations, which would trigger prudential constraints. Finally, an open question is how to select target benefits and contribution rules that maximize participation while maintaining acceptable volatility and transparency. To conclude, endowment contingency funds provide a fully funded and transparent way to enforce equal compensation among claimants or equal compensation per unit while maintaining actuarial fairness. Under mutual independence and sufficiently large pools, insurance at fair price is recovered. Contributions converge to pure premiums, and claim payouts concentrate around the targeted benefit. However, the numerical illustrations emphasize a key limitation. When occurrence probabilities are extremely small, payout volatility can remain material, so successful design must jointly consider event rarity and pool size. Future research directions include optimizing targets to foster participation and designing add-ons that clearly separate pure mutualization from any intended solidarity transfers. Thank you.